This episode tells the amazing story of how the EU took the brave step of using the climate and cost of living crisis as an opportunity to move away from fossil fuels altogether. Obviously, this didn't happen, but it could have. Welcome to this episode of our new podcast series, What is Going Wrong and How to Put It Right, where we tell the story of how the gas industry got rich off the EU energy crisis. What do the fossil fuel industry and real estate moguls have in common? Location, location, location. Last episode told the story of how the industry delayed, distracted, and watered down key measures. This episode is the epitome of privileged access to decision makers. Sound editing and musical creation by Gui Calegari. I'm Joana Louçã. What is going wrong and how to put it right. As winter took hold of Europe at the end of 2021, energy prices were already more than 6 times higher than the average of the 5 previous years. People were struggling, having to choose between heating their homes and putting food on the table. So when Russia invaded Ukraine in late February the year after, gas prices exploded, in part because the EU vowed to get off Russian pipeline gas, which accounted for 40% of the continent's gas consumption. The EU hastily brought out its policy response, something they called Repower EU, aiming to rapidly get off Russian gas by finding alternative supplies and reducing consumption. The problem was the response from the EU was woefully inadequate, and we'll get to why in a minute. As people's gas bills were driven up, industry profits also skyrocketed. The top 5 oil and gas majors, Shell, BP, TotalEnergies, ExxonMobil and Chevron, made 200 billion euros in profits in 2022. 200 billion, it sounds like a made-up sum, but it's all too real. And more than half of it went straight into the pockets of shareholders through dividends and share buybacks. High energy bills were translating into high inflation and a full-blown cost of living crisis for hundreds of millions. By September that year, 1 in 10 Europeans reported they were skipping meals to save money. It was clear the energy market was broken and not working for the people or the climate. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen even admitted so in June 2022, claiming it did not work anymore. This could have been an opportunity to chart a path away from destructive fossil fuels altogether, while making our broken energy system work for the people and the planet, right? I know, you know, we all know that is not how it went. Let's hit pause in this story for 1 minute and have a short break.
Question: what energy supplies over half the homes in America? Natural gas. What energy travels through America's most efficient energy delivery system? Gas again. What energy is basic, potentially renewable, and could last for generations? Gas once more. Conclusion: America depends on natural gas. It's our most efficient energy system today and can be counted on long into the future. Gas. The future belongs to the efficient.
We've been talking about natural gas, but did you know that its name suits the industry's interests like a glove? For it actually is methane, also known as methane gas or fossil gas. In the 1800s, natural gas became known as natural to distinguish it from the dominant gas fuel used at the time, which was coal gas. While calling it natural can help make it sound good, it is actually one of the key gases causing greenhouse emissions. And it is more than 100 times worse for global heating than carbon dioxide over a 10-year period. Because large amounts leak into the atmosphere when industry drills for and transports fossil gas, using it can be as bad for the climate as coal. A fun fact about it, and I love fun facts, is that it is naturally odorless. The typical smell is something that is added artificially. It's made unpleasant to be easily recognizable to prevent accidents such as gas leaks or explosions. As you surely already suspect, standing in the way of the Commission's self-declared best intentions was the gas lobby, a long-time ally of the European Commission and member states. And a key gas industry lobby group is the European Roundtable of Industrialists, or ERT. The ERT is a lobbying powerhouse made up of chief executives from about 60 of Europe's biggest transnational companies, which have combined revenues exceeding 2 trillion euros. Again, it's a real sum. Former ERT heavyweight Baron Daniel Janssen has described the group's role as leading a double revolution by, and I quote, reducing the power of the state and of the public sector in general through privatization and deregulation. End of quote. It wields remarkable levels of influence, and needless to say, the ERT enjoys privileged access to the most senior European leaders, including annual meetings with the Commission President and several governments. It has been a key influencer in Brussels and at national level over the decades, and it became an indispensable sounding board for von der Leyen during the COVID-19 crisis, for example. Let's get back to our story. So, what the hell happened with this response? The EU released the first draft of its plan to get off Russian gas, Repower EU, in March 2022. That month, it met the ERT 4 times. We at Corporate Europe Observatory obtained the minutes of 2 key meetings between von der Leyen, EU Energy Commission Kadri Simpson, their cabinets, and the CEOs of Europe's biggest gas companies, Shell, BP, Total Energies, Eni, RWE, and E.ON. In those meetings, the EU was warned by CEOs against fiddling with the market and problematic price caps, and advised on which measures were, and I quote, feasible. The industry CEOs pushed the EU to import more fracked gas from the US in liquefied form as LNG, despite the deeply damaging impact it has on water and air quality for communities and nature around the drilling sites and export terminals. In those meetings, the CEOs also pushed the EU to establish an industry task force so that they could continue influencing energy policy, which von der Leyen duly did. And so the EU Energy Platform's Industry Advisory Group was born. Location, location, location. I told you in the beginning of the episode, locate yourself in the heart of EU policymaking. The advisory group was made up exclusively of the gas industry, and it was supposed to identify alternative sources to Russian pipeline gas, as well as what other gas infrastructure could be needed. Did the EU also create an advisory group on ending energy poverty, inviting trade unions, housing groups, energy poverty and anti-poverty networks, climate justice organizations? No, it did not. But let's get back to the industry advisory group. Lobbyists from Shell, BP, Total Energies, Eni, etc., they were all there. This represents a colossal conflict of interest, as many members of the advisory group were also selling gas to the EU, and also had a direct financial interest in the building of new infrastructure. And the capture of the EU's climate response to the energy crisis did not stop here. We counted 200 meetings, 200, between the fossil fuel industry and top European Commission personnel, that is, commissioners, cabinets and director generals, in the 12 months following the full-scale ground invasion of Ukraine. There were likely hundreds more at the service level where there is no obligation to disclose information. Many gas companies used them to urge the Commission not to reform the energy market, which was proving very profitable. The fossil fuel industry's lobbying to delay and weaken measures coincides with no significant political intervention in energy markets, such as ambitious windfall taxes or price caps, that could have impacted industry profits but lifted the burden on struggling households. The industry used the energy crisis to successfully lobby for massive public support for new gas infrastructure and gas-based technology development, undoubtedly helped by its privileged access to decision-makers. The eventual energy market reform was hollowed out and cosmetic, maintaining fossil fuel industry profits. Last year, Shell alone made almost 30 billion euros, not as much as the previous year, 40 billion, but still extortionate, given that energy poverty has continued to rise in Europe. Big oil and gas producers claimed that taxing their profits would impact their investments in the transition. However, BP, Shell, and ExxonMobil have all subsequently slashed their climate targets in order to produce more oil, more gas, as, according to them, it was just too profitable not to. Following a complaint we at Corporate Europe Observatory presented alongside Food and Water Action Europe, the advisory group we described is now being looked into by the European Ombudsman, who investigates complaints about poor administration in EU institutions. The European Parliament also held a hearing into the responsibility of the fossil fuel industry on the cost of living and energy crisis. Speaking at the hearing was Anna Gilmore, Director of the Tobacco Control Research Group at the University of Bath. She made the case for the EU to apply similar rules to lobbying by the fossil fuel industry as those it applies to the tobacco lobby, that is, the creation of a firewall between the fossil fuel industry and decision makers when there are conflicts of interest. In short, fossil-free politics. After the hearing, the European Parliament almost passed a resolution for regulation around fossil fuel lobbying, similar to those of tobacco, but it was blocked by conservative parties with support from the Liberals. This only further emphasizes the grip of the industry over politics and the need to act. More than 100,000 people have called to kick the fossil fuel industry out of politics due to its role in the EU's response to the energy crisis. So now, it's up to our decision-makers to turn that into action. The only way to get out of the climate emergency we are living in is if we have fossil-free politics. But we don't just need to kick the fossil fuel industry out. We need the people in. We need to bring in the voices of those impacted by these crises, rather than those responsible for it. Not just in the EU, but at national level, in capitals across Europe. Polluters out and people in. We have come to the end of our episode. Please share it, rate it, and send us a message with your feedback. Text editing and research by Pascoe Sabido. Script by Pascoe and myself. Sound design and editing by Gui Calegari. Graphic design by José Torres. I'm Joana Louçã, and this was Corporate Europe Observatory's What is Going Wrong and How to Put It Right. Don't miss next week's episode about how the COVID vaccine distribution ended up as a case of catastrophic moral failure.